Dwight David Eisenhower was a Kansas farm boy who became Supreme Commander of Allied forces in Europe during World War II and later the 34th President of the United States. Dwight D Eisenhower, military leader, statesman, and architect of Cold War strategy, was born in Denison, Texas on October 14, 1890. He came from a humble background marked by hard work and religious devotion. He had a calm demeanor with his genuine smile and ability to inspire confidence in those around him. Eisenhower's early years were marked by modesty and determination. The family moved to Abilene, Kansas when he was still an infant, and it was there that he grew up in modest circumstances. His father worked at a creamery, and the family struggled financially, but they instilled strong values of discipline and self-reliance in their children. Young Dwight, called Ike by his family and friends, was an average student but excelled at sports, particularly football and baseball. He loved military history and read voraciously about famous battles and commanders, though his later career would test his understanding of war in ways no book could have prepared him for. After graduating from Abilene High School in 1909, Eisenhower worked at the creamery with his father to help support his older brother Edgar's college education. He had no clear plans for his own future, but a friend suggested he apply to the military academies, which offered free education. Eisenhower took the competitive examinations and was accepted to the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1911. He was 20 years old, older than most of his classmates, but he adapted quickly to military life. At West Point, Eisenhower was a solid but not exceptional student, graduating 61st in a class of 164 in 1915. He excelled at football until a knee injury ended his playing career, after which he became an assistant coach. His real talents lay not in academics or athletics, but in his ability to get along with people and to organize complex activities. His classmates recognized these qualities, and many who served with him at West Point would later serve under him in World War II. In 1916, Eisenhower married Mamie Geneva Dowd, whom he had met while stationed at Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Mamie came from a wealthy Denver family, and the marriage brought together two very different worlds. She was vivacious and social, while Eisenhower was reserved and focused on his career. Their marriage endured the strains of military life, frequent moves, and long separations. They had two sons, though their first child, Dowd Dwight, died of scarlet fever at age 3, a tragedy that deeply affected both parents. Their second son, John, would follow his father into military service and have a successful career of his own. Eisenhower's early military career was frustrating. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, he desperately wanted to serve in France, but the army kept him stateside training troops. He proved to be an excellent trainer and organizer, running tank training programs, but he felt he was missing the defining experience of his generation. The war ended before he could get overseas, and Eisenhower worried that his career would stagnate in the peacetime army. The 1920s and 1930s were difficult years for ambitious army officers, as the military shrank and promotions came slowly. Eisenhower remained a major for 16 years, a period that would have broken less determined men. What saved Eisenhower's career was his ability to impress senior officers. He served under several of the Army's most talented commanders, and each recognized his organizational abilities and strategic thinking. In the 1920s, he served under General Fox Connor in Panama, and Connor became his mentor, teaching him military history and strategy. Connor predicted that another world war was inevitable and that Eisenhower would play a major role in it. He arranged for Eisenhower to attend the Command and General Staff School at Fort Leavenworth, where Eisenhower graduated first in his class in 1926. This achievement marked him as an officer with exceptional potential. The 1930s, Eisenhower served under General Douglas MacArthur, first in Washington and then in the Philippines. MacArthur was brilliant but difficult, egotistical, and demanding. Eisenhower learned much from MacArthur about leadership and strategy, but he also learned what kind of leader he did not want to be. He grew frustrated with MacArthur's theatrics and self-promotion. When Eisenhower finally left the Philippines in 1939, he was determined to forge his own path. He had spent nearly 25 years in the Army without seeing combat, but he had developed skills that would prove invaluable in the coming war. When World War II began in Europe in September 1939, the United States was unprepared for war. The army was small and poorly equipped. Eisenhower was still a lieutenant colonel, but his reputation as a staff officer and planner was growing. After Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Army Chief of Staff George Marshall brought Eisenhower to Washington to help plan the war effort. Marshall was impressed by Eisenhower's strategic thinking and his ability to work with difficult personalities. Within months, Marshall promoted Eisenhower to Brigadier General and gave him increasingly important responsibilities. In June 1942, Marshall appointed Eisenhower as Commanding General of U.S. forces in the European theater. It was an astonishing promotion for an officer who had never commanded troops in combat. Eisenhower was now a major general responsible for planning the American military effort against Nazi Germany. he faced enormous challenges. He had to build an army from scratch, coordinate with the British who had been fighting for 3 years, and plan operations that would eventually lead to the invasion of Europe. His greatest asset was his ability to manage the alliance with Britain. He got along well with British commanders and politicians, smoothing over the inevitable tensions between allies. Prime Minister Winston Churchill came to trust Eisenhower's judgment and diplomatic skills. Eisenhower's first combat command came in November 1942 with Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, beginning the campaign to drive German and Italian forces from Africa. The operation was not flawless. American troops were inexperienced and made mistakes. Some commanders proved inadequate and had to be replaced, but Eisenhower learned from these early battles. He recognized that war was not just about strategy and logistics, but about leadership and morale. He visited troops frequently, talking with soldiers and building their confidence. He made tough decisions about commanders, relieving those who could not perform regardless of personal friendships. The North African campaign concluded successfully in May 1943 with the surrender of German and Italian forces. Eisenhower then commanded the invasions of Sicily in July 1943 and Italy in September 1943. These campaigns were grinding and difficult, as German forces fought skillfully in mountainous terrain. Eisenhower had to manage not only military operations, but also complex political situations, including the surrender of Italy and the formation of a new Italian government. He was learning that modern war required political as well as military skills. In December 1943, President Franklin Roosevelt appointed Eisenhower as Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, responsible for planning and executing the invasion of France. It was the most important military command of the war. Eisenhower would command American, British, Canadian, and other Allied forces in the largest amphibious invasion in history. The weight of responsibility was enormous. Failure would prolong the war and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Success would open a second front against Germany and lead to Nazi defeat. Eisenhower spent 6 months planning Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. He assembled a staff of talented officers and worked tirelessly to coordinate the thousands of details required for success. He had to manage strong-willed subordinates like British General Bernard Montgomery and American General George Patton. He had to ensure that supplies, equipment, and troops were ready. He had to maintain secrecy while preparing the largest military operation in history. The strain was immense, and Eisenhower chain-smoked and suffered from high blood pressure, but he never lost his calm demeanor or his ability to inspire confidence. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces landed on the beaches of Normandy. Eisenhower had made the final decision to launch the invasion despite uncertain weather, knowing that delay might mean disaster. The invasion succeeded, though at great cost. Allied forces established a beachhead and began the liberation of France. Eisenhower's leadership had been vindicated. Over the following months, he commanded the Allied advance across France, the liberation of Paris, and the drive toward Germany. He made crucial decisions about strategy, sometimes overruling his subordinates when he believed they were wrong. He managed the competing egos and national interests within the Allied coalition. He maintained the unity of purpose that was essential for victory. The final months of the war tested Eisenhower's leadership once more. In December 1944, German forces launched a surprise offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Allied forces were caught off guard and driven back. Eisenhower remained calm, rushing reinforcements to critical points and reorganizing the defense. The German offensive was defeated, but it delayed the Allied advance. In the spring of 1945, Eisenhower's forces crossed the Rhine and drove deep into Germany. He made the controversial decision not to race the Soviets to Berlin, believing that the political agreements among the Allies should be honored and that American lives should not be wasted capturing a city that would be in the Soviet occupation zone anyway. Germany surrendered on May 8, 1945. Eisenhower had led the Allied forces to victory in Europe. He was hailed as a hero, promoted to 5-star general, and celebrated throughout the Allied world. He had proven to be not just a competent commander, but a great one. His ability to manage the coalition, to make difficult decisions under pressure, and to maintain morale and unity had been essential to victory. He had also shown political skills that would serve him well in his later career. After the war, Eisenhower served briefly as military governor of the American occupation zone in Germany before returning to the United States. In 1945, he replaced Marshall as Army Chief of Staff. He oversaw the demobilization of the massive wartime army and tried to maintain military readiness in the emerging Cold War. He found peacetime military administration less satisfying than wartime command. In 1948, he retired from active duty to become president of Columbia University, though he had little experience in academic administration and never felt comfortable in the role. Eisenhower's retirement did not last long. In 1950, President Harry Truman asked him to return to military service as Supreme Commander of NATO. the new military alliance formed to counter Soviet power in Europe. Eisenhower accepted, believing that the defense of Western Europe was essential to American security. He spent 2 years organizing NATO forces and building the alliance's military structure. His prestige and diplomatic skills were crucial in persuading European nations to contribute forces and in maintaining American commitment to European defense. By 1952, both political parties wanted Eisenhower as their presidential candidate. He had carefully avoided partisan politics during his military career, and his political views were not well known. He was popular with the American people, who saw him as a heroic leader above partisan squabbles. After much consideration, Eisenhower declared himself a Republican and announced his candidacy. He believed that the Democratic Party had been in power too long and that new leadership was needed. He was also concerned about isolationist tendencies in the Republican Party and wanted to ensure that the United States remained engaged in world affairs. The 1952 Republican Convention nominated Eisenhower on the first ballot, defeating the conservative Senator Robert Taft. Eisenhower chose Senator Richard Nixon of California as his running mate, balancing the ticket with a younger politician who appealed to the party's conservative wing. The campaign against Democratic nominee Adlai Stevenson was hard-fought. Stevenson was an eloquent speaker and intellectual, but he could not match Eisenhower's popularity and heroic image. Eisenhower campaigned on a platform of ending the Korean War, fighting corruption, and providing moderate, efficient government. His famous smile and his simple slogan, "I like Ike," resonated with voters. He won in a landslide, carrying 39 states and receiving over 55% of the popular vote. Eisenhower took office in January 1953 at age 62. He brought to the presidency the organizational skills and strategic thinking he had developed in the military. He believed in delegation and staff work, creating a structured White House operation with clear lines of authority. He appointed strong cabinet members and gave them significant autonomy. Critics complained that he was too detached, that he delegated too much and avoided conflict, but Eisenhower believed that a president should focus on major decisions and long-term strategy rather than day-to-day management. One of Eisenhower's first priorities was ending the Korean War, which had stalemated with heavy casualties. He visited Korea shortly after his election and concluded that the war could not be won at acceptable cost. He increased military pressure on communist forces while pursuing armistice negotiations. In July 1953, an armistice was signed, ending the fighting though not technically ending the war. Eisenhower's role in achieving the armistice enhanced his reputation, though critics noted that the final terms were similar to those that could have been obtained years earlier. Eisenhower's presidency was dominated by the Cold War. He believed that the Soviet Union posed a serious threat to American security and that containment of communist expansion was essential. However, he also believed that excessive military spending could bankrupt the country and undermine the economy. He developed a strategy called the New Look, which relied on nuclear weapons and air power rather than large conventional forces. This approach was more economical but also more dangerous, as it meant that any major conflict might quickly escalate to nuclear war. Eisenhower walked a careful line, maintaining military strength while avoiding unnecessary conflicts. During his presidency, Eisenhower faced several international crises. In 1954, he refused to intervene militarily to save French forces at Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, though he did begin providing aid to South Vietnam. In 1956, he opposed the British, French, and Israeli invasion of Egypt during the Suez Crisis, forcing America's allies to withdraw. In 1958, he sent troops to Lebanon to stabilize that country during a political crisis. Throughout these crises, Eisenhower sought to avoid direct military confrontation with the Soviet Union while containing communist expansion. He relied heavily on the CIA for covert operations, authorizing the overthrow of governments in Iran in 1953 and Guatemala in 1954, actions that achieved short-term goals but created long-term problems. Domestically, Eisenhower pursued moderate policies that disappointed both conservatives and liberals. He did not attempt to dismantle New Deal programs, accepting that the federal government had a role in providing social security and regulating the economy. However, he also did not expand federal programs significantly. He believed in balanced budgets and fiscal responsibility. His most significant domestic achievement was the interstate highway system, begun in 1956, which transformed American transportation and contributed to economic growth and suburban expansion. On civil rights, Eisenhower's record was mixed. He was personally uncomfortable with segregation, but believed that changing racial attitudes required time and that federal intervention should be limited. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that school segregation was unconstitutional. Eisenhower privately disagreed with the decision, but publicly supported it as the law of the land. In 1957, he faced a crisis when Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus used National Guard troops to prevent black students from entering Little Rock Central High School. Eisenhower tried to negotiate with Faubus, but when that failed, he federalized the National Guard and sent Army troops to enforce the court order. It was the first time since Reconstruction that federal troops had been used to protect the rights of black citizens in the South. Eisenhower also signed the Civil Rights Act of 1957, the first civil rights legislation since Reconstruction, though it was weaker than many advocates wanted. Eisenhower won re-election easily in 1956, again defeating Adlai Stevenson by a wide margin. His second term was more difficult than his first. He suffered a heart attack in 1955 and other health problems that raised questions about his ability to serve. The Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, the first artificial satellite, creating fears that America was falling behind in science and technology. The economy went into recession in 1958. Democrats made significant gains in the 1958 congressional elections. Eisenhower's leadership style, which had seemed reassuring in his first term, now seemed passive and out of touch to critics. In his final years as president, Eisenhower tried to ease Cold War tensions. He met with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev in 1959, and the two leaders agreed to pursue better relations. Eisenhower planned to visit the Soviet Union in 1960, but the trip was cancelled after the Soviets shot down an American U-2 spy plane and captured the pilot. The incident embarrassed Eisenhower, who had initially denied that the United States conducted spy flights. His hopes for a breakthrough with the Soviets ended in recrimination and renewed tension. Eisenhower left office in January 1961, succeeded by John F. Kennedy. In his farewell address, he warned about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, the alliance of military and defense industry interests that promoted high military spending. It was an ironic warning from a career military man, but Eisenhower had come to believe that excessive military spending and the influence of defense contractors posed a threat to American democracy. The farewell address was largely ignored at the time but would be remembered and quoted by later generations. In retirement, Eisenhower lived on his farm in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. He wrote his memoirs, played golf, and painted. He remained active in Republican politics, though he was frustrated by the party's increasing conservatism. He supported moderate candidates and opposed the nomination of Barry Goldwater in 1964. He watched with concern as the Vietnam War escalated under Presidents Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, though he generally supported their policies. His health declined through the 1960s. He suffered several heart attacks and underwent surgery. On March 28, 1969, Dwight D Eisenhower died at Walter Reed Army Medical Center in Washington. He was 78 years old. Eisenhower's funeral was a state occasion befitting a former president and war hero. He was buried in Abilene, Kansas, in a simple military uniform as he had requested. Tributes came from around the world, recognizing his leadership during World War II and his 8 years as president. Yet even at his death, assessments of his presidency were mixed. Many historians viewed him as a passive president who had failed to provide strong leadership on civil rights and other domestic issues. They criticized his reliance on nuclear weapons and covert operations in foreign policy. They saw him as a caretaker president who had not addressed the emerging problems of the 1960s. Over time, however, historical assessments of Eisenhower have become more favorable. Scholars who examined his papers discovered that he was far more engaged and active than his public image suggested. He deliberately cultivated an image of being above politics while actually making careful political calculations. He used his staff system not to avoid decisions, but to ensure that he received thorough analysis before deciding. He achieved his major goals of ending the Korean War, avoiding new wars, containing Soviet expansion, and maintaining prosperity. The 1950s, often dismissed as a complacent decade, now appear as a time of significant achievement and relative stability. Eisenhower's legacy includes both his military leadership and his presidency. As Supreme Commander in World War II, he demonstrated exceptional ability to manage a coalition, to make difficult decisions under pressure, and to maintain strategic focus. His leadership was essential to Allied victory. As president, he provided steady leadership during a dangerous period of the Cold War. He avoided war while maintaining American strength. He accepted the basic framework of the New Deal while restraining government growth. He began the process of federal involvement in civil rights, though he did not move as quickly as many wanted. Yet Eisenhower's presidency also had limitations. His reliance on covert operations created problems that would haunt later administrations. His nuclear strategy was risky and left little room for flexible response. His caution on civil rights disappointed those seeking faster change. His administrative style, while efficient, sometimes seemed impersonal and detached. He was better at managing existing policies than at developing new initiatives. He was a man of the 1940s and 1950s trying to lead America in a time of rapid social and technological change. Perhaps the most fitting assessment of Dwight D Eisenhower is that he was a great general and a good president. He had extraordinary talents as a military leader and brought many of those talents to the presidency. He was steady, reliable, and competent. He achieved what he set out to achieve, ending the Korean War and maintaining peace and prosperity. He was personally honest in an age that would soon see political corruption scandals. He provided leadership that most Americans found reassuring. Yet he was not a transformative president who reshaped American politics or society. He preserved and managed rather than innovated and inspired. Eisenhower represents a particular type of American leader, the military hero who brings order and competence to civilian government, but whose vision is ultimately limited by his background and temperament. History has many such figures, men who excel in crisis but struggle to address long-term social change. Eisenhower's achievement was not in transforming America, but in leading it safely through a dangerous period. That may seem modest compared to more activist presidents, but it required genuine skill and judgment. In the end, Dwight D. Eisenhower was neither a visionary nor a mere caretaker, but rather a skilled leader who understood his strengths and limitations. His legacy includes both military victory in World War II and steady leadership during the Cold War. He is remembered today for D-Day and the interstate highway system, for his farewell address warning about the military-industrial complex, and for his reassuring presence during the 1950s. This may not capture the full complexity of his leadership, but it reflects the essential truth that he was a man who served his country faithfully in war and peace, and who left America stronger and more secure than he found it.